Before we begin this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss our daily dose of amazing true stories that will leave you speechless. Now, let's dive into today's remarkable tale. A crisp autumn morning painted Stonebridge Palace in shades of amber and gold as tourists gathered eagerly around the historic Wellington Gate. The ancient stonework, weathered by centuries of history, stood as a testament to tradition and dignity. Among the royal guards positioned at their posts, James Bennett stood motionless, his scarlet uniform pristine, his polished boots gleaming in the morning sun. For 6 years, James had served with unwavering dedication. The prestigious position of royal guard wasn't just a job. It was a calling that demanded absolute discipline, unshakable composure, and iron-clad restraint. No matter what happened around them, the guards were trained to remain stoic, their faces expressionless, their posture perfect. That morning had started like any other. Tour groups shuffled past, cameras flashing, children pointing and waving, trying desperately to make the guards smile or blink. James had seen it all. Funny faces, jokes, even dancing. But what was about to unfold would test his training like never before. Richard Thompson pushed through the crowd, his expensive camera swinging from his neck, designer sunglasses perched on his head despite the cloudy weather. His wife, Jennifer, trailed behind, him apologizing quietly to the people he shoved aside. Tour guide David Parker's voice carried over the murmuring crowd, explaining the historic significance of the palace and the sacred duties of the royal guards. "Remember, folks," David emphasized, "these guards are elite military personnel. Please show them the respect they deserve. Photography is allowed, but maintain a respectful distance." Rick snorted, taking a long sip from his oversized soft drink. "They're just glorified statues," he said loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear. "My tax dollars pay their salaries. I can do whatever I want." Jennifer touched his arm gently. "Rick, please. You're not even from this country." But Rick was already moving closer to James, his phone held high, recording. "Hey, toy soldier!" he called out, a mocking grin spreading across his face. "Do something funny for my followers. Come on, my video needs some action." James remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead, exactly as his training demanded. Inside, though, his jaw clenched ever so slightly. 6 years of service had taught him to read people, and something about Rick Thompson set off warning bells. Sarah Miller, a young tourist from Canada, watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. She'd been photographing the architectural details of the palace when Rick's voice had cut through the respectful murmur of the crowd. Now she lowered her camera, sensing the tension building in the air. Rick, getting no response, took another step closer. The empty soft drink cup dangled from his fingers as he invaded the forbidden space directly in front of James. Tour guide David Parker stepped forward, his voice taking on an edge of authority. "Sir, please step back behind the barrier. It's for your own safety and out of respect for the guard's duties." Rick turned, his face flushed with either embarrassment or anger, possibly both. "Respect?" he scoffed. "For what? Standing around all day playing dress-up?" He gestured wildly with his cup, dark drops of soda splattering on the immaculate pavement. Captain William Harrison observed the situation from his position near the palace entrance. In 20 years of service, he'd seen countless tourists try to provoke the guards. Usually, a stern word from security was enough to deflate their bravado. But something about this tourist's demeanor suggested this situation might escalate. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Rick, his face twisted in a sneer, looked straight at James. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then, with deliberate contempt, Rick tossed his empty cup. It arced through the air, sticky, drops of soda trailing behind it, before striking James squarely in the chest. The dark liquid splashed across his pristine red uniform, creating a spreading stain on the fabric that had been immaculate moments before. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Jennifer Thompson covered her mouth in horror, while Sarah Miller instinctively raised her camera, capturing the moment in a series of rapid shots. David Parker was already reaching for his radio to call security, but he needn't have bothered. James Bennett didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink as the soda dripped down his uniform. His discipline held firm, even as his heart pounded beneath his soaked jacket. But there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of steel that hadn't been there before. What Rick Thompson didn't know, what none of the tourists could have known, was that James Bennett wasn't just any royal guard. Before accepting this prestigious position, he had served with distinction in the Special Forces. His current role demanded absolute restraint, but his previous one had taught him something else entirely: patience. And at that moment, as soda dripped from his uniform and Rick's mocking laughter echoed across the courtyard, James knew that karma was about to teach a very important lesson. Captain William Harrison's weathered face remained impassive as he watched the scene unfold, but his mind was already several steps ahead. In 20 years of service, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations, and right now, every instinct told him this incident was far from over. Rick Thompson stood there, a triumphant smirk plastered across his face, clearly expecting some reaction from James. The crowd had gone eerily quiet, phones raised to capture whatever might happen next. Jennifer Thompson had stepped away from her husband, her face flushed with embarrassment and growing anger. "Did you see that?" Rick called out to his social media live stream. "These guys really are just statues. Come on, buddy, at least wipe yourself off." He reached into his pocket, pulling out another empty cup, clearly contemplating a repeat performance. That's when Sarah Miller stepped forward, her camera lowered, but still in hand. "You know there are security cameras everywhere," she said, loudly, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "And about 50 people just recorded you assaulting a military officer. I wonder how that'll look on your social media." Rick's smirk faltered slightly, but he puffed up his chest, trying to maintain his bravado. "Assault, please. It's just a drink. Besides, these guys are trained for this stuff, right? They're supposed to just stand there and take it." Tour guide David Parker had already radioed for security, and Robert Anderson was approaching swiftly. From the side entrance, his black uniform a stark contrast to the ceremonial red of the Royal Guards. But before he could reach Rick, something unexpected happened. Michael Reynolds, the guard stationed opposite James, suddenly spoke, breaking protocol for the first time in his 6-year service. "Stand down, Bennett." The words were barely audible, but they carried weight. James's hands had tightened almost imperceptibly on his rifle, his knuckles white beneath his gloves. To most observers, he hadn't moved at all, but Michael had served. Alongside James in Afghanistan, he knew the signs. Captain Harrison moved forward now, his stride purposeful. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his rank, "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to come with me." Rick turned, his face reddening. "Like hell I will. Do you know who I am? I'm an influencer with over 1 million followers. This'll be great content for my channel. Power-tripping palace guards harass tourists. My lawyers will have a field day with this." Jennifer Thompson had finally had enough. "Rick, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself. And me." She turned to Captain Harrison, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry about my husband's behavior. He's been difficult since his company went bankrupt last month." Rick's face went from red to purple. "Jen, shut up. That was supposed to be private." But Jennifer wasn't finished. He's been trying to rebuild his following by being more controversial in his videos. Apparently, being a decent human being doesn't get enough views these days. The crowd murmured, phones still recording as the situation evolved. Sarah Miller's camera clicked quietly, documenting every moment. She had a feeling these photos might become important later. Security officer Robert Anderson had reached them now, positioning himself strategically between Rick and James. "Sir, we can handle this one of two ways. You can come with us voluntarily to discuss this incident, or we can make it official and involve the local authorities. Your choice." Rick glanced around, suddenly realizing he had lost control of the narrative. His live stream was filling with comments, but not the supportive ones he'd expected. His followers were calling him out, some even screen recording the stream as evidence. "Fine," he spat, trying to salvage some dignity. "But this isn't over. I know people, important people. You'll be hearing from my lawyers." As Rick was escorted away, Captain Harrison turned to James, speaking in a low voice. "At ease, Bennett. Go get cleaned up." But before James could move, Harrison added something else so quietly that only James could hear. "He has a meeting with the chief constable in an hour. Might be worth stopping by." James gave an almost imperceptible nod, his face still perfectly composed despite the drying. Sewed on his uniform.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
As he marched away with military precision, Sarah Miller noticed something odd about his route. He wasn't heading toward the guard quarters, but rather toward the administrative wing of the palace. Jennifer Thompson watched her husband being led away, then approached James with a tissue in her outstretched hand. "I am so sorry," she began, but James had already passed by, his stride unwavering. Protocol dictated that he couldn't acknowledge her kindness, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of recognition, perhaps even appreciation. What no one in the crowd knew was that James Bennett's path to becoming a royal guard had been anything but traditional. Before standing sentinel at Stonebridge Palace, he had served 10 years in special forces, specializing in something the military called corrective engagement, teaching valuable lessons to those who thought themselves above the law. Captain Harrison knew this, of course. It was why he had specifically requested James for Wellington Gate duty. And as he watched his young guard march toward the administrative wing, Harrison allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes, he mused, karma needed a little help finding its target. Chief Constable Thomas Walker sat behind his imposing oak desk, reviewing the security footage of the incident for the third time. The crisp digital display showed multiple angles of Rick Thompson's actions, each view more damning than the last. As he pressed pause on the final frame, a knock echoed through his office. "Enter!" Walker called out, already knowing who it would be. James Bennett stepped in, his uniform now pristine again, not a trace of the earlier incident visible. But something had changed in his bearing, a subtle shift that only those who knew him well would notice. Chief Walker was one of those people. "Ah, Bennett," Walker said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I was just reviewing our friend, Mr. Thompson's performance. Quite the showman, isn't he?" James remained standing, his posture perfect. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Walker leaned back, a knowing look crossing his face. "Granted," and closed the door. As James shut the heavy wooden door, memories flooded back. Memories of another time, another place, when he and Walker had served together in the Special Forces. Back then, Walker had been his commanding officer, leading their unit through some of the most challenging operations in recent military history. 6 years ago, James began, his voice steady. "When I applied for the Royal Guard position, you vouched for me. You said this post would require more discipline than any special ops mission." Walker nodded, remembering that conversation well. "And you've proven me right. Until today, I've never seen you so much as twitch, no matter what. Tourists threw at you. Figuratively speaking, of course." He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. Though today it became literal. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Thompson is currently being interviewed by security." "Indeed," Walker confirmed, turning his computer screen to show another security feed. Rick Thompson sat in an interview room, his earlier bravado notably diminished. Interesting fellow, our Mr. Thompson. Did some digging after the incident. Seems he's been having quite a rough time lately. James watched the screen carefully. Through the high-definition feed, he could see the slight tremor in Rick's hands, the way his eyes darted around the room. The man's designer clothes couldn't hide the desperation in his bearing. His company's bankruptcy made quite a splash in the financial papers, Walker continued, pulling up several news articles. Lost everything except his social media following. Been trying to rebuild by creating increasingly controversial content. Today's stunt was just the latest in a series of escalating incidents. Sarah Miller, the tourist who had photographed the incident, had already uploaded her photos to the palace's security system. The images showed every moment in crystal clarity. Rick's sneer, the arc of the cup, the splash against James's uniform, and most importantly, the look in Rick's eyes. It wasn't just disrespect, it was desperation. His wife mentioned lawyers, James said quietly. Walker's laugh was short and sharp. Yes, about that. Seems Mr. Thompson has been making similar threats at various establishments lately. Empty threats, all of them. His last lawyer dropped him 3 months ago over unpaid bills. Jennifer Thompson sat in a separate interview room, her composure cracking as she gave her statement to Officer Robert Anderson. He wasn't always like this. Her voice wavered through the security feed. The bankruptcy broke something in him. He became obsessed with regaining his influence, his status, started picking fights, causing scenes, anything to get views. James watched her for a moment, recognition flickering in his eyes. He had seen this before, not with social media influencers, but with others who had lost everything. Sometimes, people needed to hit rock bottom before they could rebuild. "What do you suggest, sir?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. Walker stood, walking to the window that overlooked the palace grounds. Mr. Thompson's actions today constitute assault on a military officer. That's serious enough on its own. Add trespassing, disorderly conduct, and attempting to incite public disorder. He turned back to James. However, pressing such charges might be considered heavy-handed. Perhaps there's an alternative approach, James suggested, his voice carefully neutral. Walker's smile widened slightly. "I was thinking the same thing. You know, we have a community outreach program starting next week, teaching young offenders about respect, discipline, consequences. Could use someone with real-world experience to help run it." James raised an eyebrow. "Community service?" 2 months, Walker confirmed. Working directly with troubled youth, sharing his extensive social media expertise to help them understand the consequences of online actions. Plus, a public apology, of course, posted on all his social channels. Through the security feed, they watched as Rick slumped in his chair, the full weight of his situation finally sinking in. His phone lay on the table, notifications still pinging with comments from followers who had witnessed his live-streamed meltdown. "And if he refuses?" James asked. "Then we proceed with formal charges," Walker said simply. His choice, though given his current financial situation and the overwhelming evidence. He gestured to the screens, showing multiple angles of the incident. "I suspect he'll make the wise choice." James nodded, understanding completely. Sometimes, karma didn't need to strike back hard. It just needed to strike smart. The interview room felt smaller with each passing minute. Rick Thompson sat alone, his designer shirt now wrinkled, his carefully styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. His phone lay silent on the table. They'd asked him to turn off the live stream after explaining the severity of his situation. The door opened and Officer Robert Anderson entered, followed by Jennifer. Rick straightened up, trying to summon his influencer confidence, but it crumbled when he saw his wife's expression. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disappointment. tinged with something that looked surprisingly like hope. "Mr. Thompson," Anderson began, setting a folder on the table, "we've reviewed the incident thoroughly. The evidence is quite clear." He opened the folder, spreading out photographs taken by Sarah Miller. Each image captured his actions in perfect clarity, his aggressive stance, the moment of throwing the cup, the aftermath. "Look," Rick started, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. "I admit I got carried away. It was just supposed to be content for my followers. People love controversy, you know. Gets the engagement up." Jennifer sat down beside him, though not as close as she usually would. "Rick, please, just listen to what they're offering." Anderson laid out 2 documents. "You have 2 options, Mr. Thompson. The first is that we proceed with formal charges: assault on a military officer, trespassing, disorderly conduct, inciting public disorder. Given the video evidence, both from security cameras and your own live stream, conviction would be almost certain." Rick's face paled. "And the second option? Community service," Anderson replied. 2 months working with troubled youth, teaching them about social media responsibility and the consequences of online actions, plus a public apology posted across all your platforms." Rick laughed, but it was hollow. "You want me to teach kids, me, after what I just did?" "Actually," a new voice said, "that's exactly why we want you." James Bennett stood in the doorway, his uniform immaculate once again. Rick instinctively shrank back in his chair, but James's expression wasn't threatening. If anything, it was thoughtful. "You understand social media," James continued, stepping into the room. "You know how to reach people. But more importantly, you know firsthand how the pressure of maintaining an online presence can push someone to make poor choices." Jennifer reached for Rick's hand. "He's right, Rick. Remember why you started your channel in the first place? You wanted to inspire people, show them how to build something from nothing. When did it become about shocking people instead of helping them?" Rick stared at his silent phone, remembering. Before the bankruptcy, before the desperate chase for views, his content had been different. He'd shared business advice, motivation, real success stories. People had genuinely thanked him for changing their lives. "The youth program needs someone who understands both sides," James explained. "Someone who knows the allure of instant fame and the price it can carry. Someone who's made mistakes but is willing to learn from them." "And if I refuse?" Rick asked, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then we proceed with charges," Anderson said simply. "The choice is yours. But I should mention, the youth center is run by Chief Constable Walker. He and James serve together in special forces. They believe in second chances, but they also believe in consequences." Rick looked at Jennifer, seeing the hope in her eyes. Then he glanced at his phone, thinking about his followers. Most of them had turned on him after the live stream, disgusted by his behavior. His latest video was already going viral, but not in the way he'd planned. "The kids you'll be working with," James added quietly, "they're at a crossroads. Some of them have already had trouble with the law. They need to see that it's never too late to change course, to rebuild." Rick picked up one of the photographs, really looking at himself for the first time. The man in the image, aggressive, entitled, desperate for attention, was someone he barely recognized. When had he become this person? "The program starts next week," Anderson said. "You'll work directly with the youth 3 days a week, plus planning sessions with our staff. The other days, you'll help with the palace's social media outreach, showing people the real work that goes on here, including the dedication of our guards." Jennifer squeezed Rick's hand. "It's a chance to start over, Rick, to use your influence for something good again." Rick looked at James, the man he had humiliated just hours ago. "Why are you giving me this chance?" James's expression remained professional, but there was understanding in his eyes. Because 15 years ago, someone gave me a choice too. Sometimes people need a wake-up call to remember who they really are. Slowly, Rick pulled the community service agreement closer. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the pen. Everything he had built, all his influence and following, had been stripped away by his own actions. But maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to build something better. The Stonebridge Youth Center stood in stark contrast to the palace just a few blocks away. Where the palace boasted grandeur and magnificence, the youth center was all practicality, a converted warehouse with graffiti art decorating its walls, each piece carefully created by the teens, who called this place their sanctuary. Rick Thompson stood at the entrance, tugging uncomfortably at his plain black t-shirt. No designer labels today, no carefully curated outfit for his social media audience. Chief Walker had been very clear about that. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called. "Out right on time." James Bennett approached, but not in his Royal Guard uniform. Instead, he wore casual clothes, jeans and a simple blue shirt. Without the ceremonial uniform, he looked different, more approachable, but no less commanding. "I didn't expect to see you here," Rick admitted, trying to hide his nervousness. "I volunteer here 3 days a week," James explained. "Have been for years. These kids need mentors who understand discipline and consequences." He paused, studying Rick's expression. "And now, they need someone who understands the digital world they're growing up in." Inside, the center was alive with activity. Teenagers moved between different areas, some studying at computers, others working on art projects, a few practicing dance moves in front of a mirrored wall. But as Rick and James entered, the energy shifted. The kids noticed them immediately, and whispers spread quickly. "Isn't that the guy from the viral video? The one who threw stuff at the guard? No way. What's he doing here?" A tall teenager with bright blue hair approached them, her eyes fixed on Rick. "You're that influencer," she said, not bothering with introductions. "The one who got millions of views for being a jerk at the palace." Rick winced. In the weeks since the incident, his viral moment had indeed garnered millions of views, but not the kind he'd wanted. His followers had dropped by the thousands, and the comments had been brutal. "Emily," James said, his voice firm but kind. "Mr. Thompson is here to help with our social media program." Emily crossed her arms. "Help? Like showing us how to destroy our reputation in under 5 minutes." The comment stung, but Rick forced himself to maintain eye contact. "Actually," he said, "I'm here to show you how I destroyed everything I built, so you don't make the same mistakes." His honesty seemed to catch Emily off guard. She studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Whatever. But if you're going to teach us anything, you better be real. We can spot fake from a mile away." James led Rick to a small classroom where about 15 teenagers waited. Each of them had a phone or tablet, and all of them knew exactly who he was. The tension in the room was palpable. "Most of you know Mr. Thompson from social media," James began. "He's here because actions have consequences, but also because he has valuable experience to share. Listen to him, but more importantly, learn from his story." Rick stepped forward, his heart pounding. He was used to speaking to audiences, but this was different. These weren't followers seeking entertainment. These were kids who had already seen him at his worst. "A week ago," he started, his voice shaky. "I thought I knew everything about social media influence. I had 1 million followers, sponsorship deals, and a reputation I'd spent years building." He pulled out his phone, opening his profile. "Want to see what I have now?" He connected his phone to the projector. His latest stats appeared on the screen. Followers down by 60%, engagement practically non-existent, comment section filled with criticism and mockery. "One moment of stupidity," Rick continued. "One decision to chase views instead of values, and it all fell apart. But here's the thing. It didn't start with throwing that cup. It started months ago when I began choosing controversy over content, reaction over responsibility. Emily raised her hand. But isn't that what social media is all about? The more shocking you are, the more attention you get. Rick shook his head. That's what I thought too, but look at this. He pulled up his old content, posts about business advice, motivation, real success stories. These got less immediate reaction, but they actually helped people. I have messages from followers saying these videos changed their lives. So why'd you change? Another teen asked. Rick paused, the question hitting harder than he expected. Because I lost my business, and with it, my identity. I thought I needed to be more extreme to stay relevant, but all I did was lose myself. For the next hour, Rick shared his journey, from successful business owner to desperate influencer chasing clicks. The teens listened, some skeptical, others surprisingly engaged. They asked tough questions, called him out when his answers seemed superficial, and slowly, something unexpected happened. Rick found himself being more honest than he'd been in years. He talked about the shame of bankruptcy, the fear of irrelevance, the addictive nature of online validation. And the kids, many of whom struggled with their own social media pressures, began to open up too. My whole life is about likes, one girl admitted. If a post doesn't get enough attention, I delete it. Sometimes I delete myself for days. I cyberbullied someone last year, another teen shared. Thought it would make me popular. Instead, I got suspended and lost all my real friends. James watched from the back of the room as Rick connected with the teens in a way he hadn't expected. The man who had thrown a cup at him a week ago was transforming before his eyes, finding purpose in his pain. As the session ended, Emily approached. Rick again. You're still kind of a jerk, she said bluntly, but at least you're an honest one now. Coming from her, it was high praise. 2 weeks into his community service, Rick was starting to find his rhythm at the youth center. The initial skepticism from the teens had begun to fade, replaced by a cautious acceptance. Even Emily, with her electric blue hair and sharp wit, had started to warm up to him. But on this particular Wednesday morning, everything was about to change. Rick arrived at the center earlier than usual, carrying a box of donated tablets he'd managed to secure from his remaining business contacts. As he approached the entrance, he noticed a small crowd of teenagers gathered around someone's phone, their expressions a mix of excitement and concern. "Did you see this?" Emily called out as Rick approached. "Someone's trying to steal your thunder." She held up her phone, showing him a video that was rapidly gaining traction across social media. The footage showed another tourist at Stonebridge Palace, clearly trying to recreate Rick's infamous moment. The young man in the video was even wearing a similar outfit to what Rick had worn that day. "He's calling himself Thompson 20, Emily explained, scrolling through the comments. "Says he's going to do what you did, but bigger. He's planning something for today's changing of the guard ceremony." Rick's stomach churned as he watched the video. The young man's cocky attitude, his desperate grab for attention. It was like looking in a mirror, seeing exactly who he'd been just weeks ago. The comments section was already filling with anticipation, people eager to see another confrontation with the royal guards. James Bennett appeared beside them, his expression serious. "We've seen the video. Palace security is aware, but they can't stop someone from showing up. He's doing this because of me," Rick said quietly, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "I started this trend." "Then maybe you need to end it," Emily suggested, her tone challenging. "You've been talking about influence and responsibility. Time to prove it's not just talk." Rick looked at the time. The changing of the guard ceremony would begin in 2 hours. His social media expertise told him exactly what this copycat was planning. Something outrageous. Enough to go viral, something that would make Rick's cup-throwing incident look tame by comparison. "I need to make a video," Rick said suddenly. "Right now." Emily raised an eyebrow. "What happened to laying low and reflecting on your mistakes?" "Sometimes," James interjected, "the best way to show change is to actively prevent others from making your mistakes." The center's computer lab was empty this early in the morning. Rick set up his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he prepared to go live for the first time since the incident. Emily and a few other teens gathered around, watching curiously. "No script," Emily reminded him. "Be real." Rick nodded, took a deep breath, and pressed the live button. Immediately, notifications started pinging as his remaining followers joined the stream. The number was smaller than he was used to, but somehow that made it feel more important. "Hey everyone," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "You've probably seen the video of someone planning to copy what I did at the palace. I need to talk about that." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I did was wrong, not just disrespectful. It was a desperate attempt to stay relevant by disrespecting someone who dedicates their life to service." Comments started flooding, in some supportive, others mocking. Rick ignored them, focusing instead on what he needed to say. To the guy calling himself Thompson 2.0, "I see you. I see exactly what you're doing because I did it myself. You want attention, views, followers. You think creating controversy will give you what you want, but let me tell you what it really gives you." Rick turned his phone, showing the teens in the background. "It gives you community service. It gives you legal troubles. But more importantly, it puts you in front of kids like these who remind you every day what real influence should look like." Emily stepped forward, addressing the camera. "He's not lying. He was a total jerk, but at least he's trying to fix it. Anyone who copies him now is just being a jerk without the redemption arc." Rick couldn't help but smile at her blunt assessment. "The Royal Guards aren't props for your content. They're soldiers who've served their country. I learned that the hard way. Don't make my mistake, thinking that going viral is more important than being a decent human being." The live stream's viewer count was climbing now, sharing buttons lighting up as his message spread. In the comments, someone posted a link to Thompson 2.0's profile, showing that the copycat was watching the stream. To everyone watching this, Rick continued, "Please don't share or encourage any videos of people harassing the guards. I know it seems funny or entertaining, but there's nothing admirable about disrespecting people who serve their country. If you want to create content that matters, create something that helps people, that adds value to their lives." James watched from the doorway, a subtle nod of approval on his face. The teens in the room had their phones out too, sharing Rick's stream, adding their own comments about his work at the center. "Last thing," Rick said, looking directly into the camera. "To Thompson 2.0, if you're serious about building a following, come down to the Stonebridge Youth Center instead. I'll show you how to create content that actually makes a difference. And to everyone else who shared my original video, please, share this one instead. Let's make responsibility go viral for a change." He ended the stream, his heart pounding. Emily checked her phone, scrolling through the responses. "It's already getting picked up by major accounts," she reported. "People are actually listening." Before Rick could respond, James's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up with a slight smile. Palace security just reported that Thompson 2.0 deleted his video and cancelled his plans. Apparently, he's asking about volunteer opportunities at the youth center instead. Rick let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time since his own incident, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: the satisfaction of using his influence for something genuinely good. The morning after his viral live stream, Rick arrived at the youth center to find an unusual scene. A small group of people waited outside, Not teenagers, but young content creators, including the very person who had called himself Thompson 2, Ijuru. The would-be copycat, whose real name was Marcus Chen, looked considerably different in person. Younger, more uncertain, without the brash confidence he'd displayed in his deleted video. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Rick said, approaching. "The group." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Your video, it made me think. I've been trying to grow my following for months, doing increasingly stupid things. When I saw what happened with you, I thought recreating it would be my big break." James Bennett appeared beside Rick, dressed casually as he always did at the center. "And now, Marcus admitted, I'm wondering if I've been chasing the wrong kind of attention." Inside the center, Emily and the other teens were already setting up for their morning social media workshop. When they saw the new arrivals, their reactions were mixed, curiosity mingled with skepticism. "Are these your disciples?" Emily asked Rick, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "coming to learn the ways of responsible influencing?" But before Rick could respond, one of the young content creators stepped forward. "Actually, we're here because what Rick said yesterday made sense. We've all been stuck in this cycle of trying to outdo each other with shocking content, but what's the point if we're just making things worse?" Emily studied the group, her natural cynicism warring with interest. "Well, you've come to the right place for a reality check. We've got a whole curriculum of how not to be a social media jerk, thanks to Professor Thompson here." Rick couldn't help but smile at her description. "Actually, I think we could all learn from each other. These creators have experience building audiences. Maybe they just need help finding better ways to use that influence." James watched the interaction with interest. Over the past weeks, he'd seen Rick transform from a desperate attention seeker into someone who genuinely wanted to make amends. Now, unexpectedly, that transformation was attracting others who saw themselves in his story. "Why don't we change today's plan?" Rick suggested. "Instead of our usual workshop, let's have an open discussion about influence and responsibility. Real experiences, real consequences, real solutions." The next 2 hours were unlike anything the youth center had seen before. Teens and content creators shared their stories openly. The pressure to go viral, the temptation to cross lines for views, the toll it took on their self-worth. Marcus described how he'd lost his job focusing on social media fame, mirroring Rick's own downfall. "I thought if I could just get enough followers, everything else would fall into place," Marcus admitted. But watching Rick's original video go viral for all the wrong reasons, it was like seeing my own future if I didn't change course. One of the younger teens raised her hand. "But how do you get people to pay attention if you're not doing crazy stuff?" Rick looked at James, who nodded encouragingly. "Let me show you something," Rick said, pulling up his analytics on the projector screen. "This is my engagement from when I was doing controversial stunts." The numbers were high but shallow. Lots of views, minimal meaningful interaction. Then he showed them the stats from yesterday's live stream. The raw numbers were lower, but the engagement was different. Thousands of thoughtful comments, shares with personal messages, and most surprisingly, a surge in followers who specifically mentioned wanting to see his journey of change. Real influence, Rick explained, isn't about having the most viewers. It's about having the right ones, people who connect with your authentic message. Emily, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Show them what we've been working on." She pulled up the youth center's new social media page, a project they'd started the previous week. It featured stories of the teens' talents, their community work, their personal growth. The following was small but engaged, with local businesses already reaching out about sponsorship opportunities. "This," Rick said, gesturing to the screen, "is what sustainable influence looks like. Building something real, even if it grows slowly." Marcus and his fellow creators leaned forward, studying the content strategy. One of them raised his hand. Could we maybe help with this? Use our existing followers to boost these kids' positive messages? James stepped forward. That's exactly the kind of collaboration we're looking for, but it has to be genuine. These teens can spot insincerity from a mile away. The energy in the room shifted as creators and teens began brainstorming ideas together. Emily sketched out a content calendar, while Marcus offered tips on video editing. Another creator helped. A shy teen crafted the perfect bio for her art page. Rick stood back, watching the scene with a mixture of pride and humility. Just weeks ago, he'd been at his lowest point, throwing a cup at a royal guard for views. Now, somehow, that rock-bottom moment was transforming into a foundation for something meaningful. Jennifer, who had been quietly supporting Rick's journey, chose that moment to visit the center. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene of collaboration and genuine engagement. "This is what you were meant to do," she said softly to Rick. "Not chasing clicks, but actually helping people grow." 1 month into Rick's community service, the Stonebridge Youth Center's social media presence had grown beyond anyone's expectations. The collaboration between the teens and reformed content creators had created something unique, authentic stories of transformation that resonated with people far beyond their local community. But with success came a new set of challenges. "We've got a problem," Emily announced one morning, bursting into the center's computer lab where Rick was helping Marcus edit a video about teen entrepreneurship. She thrust her phone forward, showing them a notification from a major media outlet. "They want to do a feature story on us," Rick read aloud, not seeing the problem. "Isn't that good news?" Emily shook her head, her blue hair swishing with frustration. "Keep reading." The email continued. "We're particularly interested in the controversial backstory, the viral guard incident that led to this unlikely redemption story. We'd like to recreate the original scene for comparison." Rick's heart sank. Of course they wanted drama. That's what sold. That's what he himself had once chased so desperately. James Bennett, who had been quietly observing from his usual spot near the door, stepped forward. "What are you thinking, Rick?" All eyes in the room turned to him. The teens had grown to respect his opinion over the past month, and the content creators looked to him as a mentor. His response to this would set the tone for everything they were building. "It's a trap," Marcus said before Rick could answer. "They want to use the controversy to get clicks, just like I would have done a month ago." Rick nodded slowly. "But it's also an opportunity, maybe not the way they're suggesting, but an opportunity nonetheless." He turned to the group of teens who had gathered around. "What do you think? It's your center, your stories. How should we handle this?" The discussion that followed was heated. Some saw the media attention as a chance to reach more people with their message. Others worried it would overshadow the real work they were doing. Emily, as usual, had the most direct take. "If we let them turn this into another viral moment about the guard incident, we're no better than Thompson 2. "Zero would have been," Emily declared. "No offense, Marcus." Marcus shrugged. "None taken. She's right." Rick looked at James, who had been unusually quiet. "What's your perspective on this? As the guard I disrespected, I mean." James considered for a moment. The incident itself isn't the story. What happened after? That's what matters. The changes, the growth, the ripple effects. A slow smile spread across Rick's face. "Then, maybe that's our answer." He turned to the group. "What if we counteroffer? Instead of recreating the incident, we show them what real viral content should look like." Emily's eyes lit up. "You mean like a behind the scenes of what we're actually doing here?" "Exactly," Rick nodded. "We show them the teens learning digital marketing to help local businesses, the workshops on responsible content creation, the mentorship program we're building. The real stuff, Marcus added, catching on, not the manufactured drama they're expecting. Jennifer, who had become a regular presence at the center, supporting both Rick and the teens, spoke up from where she'd been quietly working on social media analytics. The numbers support it. Our most engaging content isn't about Rick's incident. It's the transformation stories, the small businesses we've helped, the real connections being made. Rick began drafting a response to the media outlet, but Emily stopped him. Wait, if we're going to do this, let's do it our way, not just a boring email. What followed was a flurry of activity as the entire center mobilized. Teens and content creators worked together, filming quick segments showcasing their daily activities. They captured genuine moments, a young artist learning to market her work ethically, a former troublemaker teaching seniors about social media safety, Marcus mentoring younger kids about the pitfalls of chasing fame. The final touch was something unexpected. Footage from the palace security cameras of Rick's original incident, but instead of focusing on the disrespect, they showed what happened after. The quiet dignity of James's response, the way the other guards maintained their composure, the professionalism that Rick had once mocked but now deeply respected. This is what real influence looks like, Rick narrated over the footage. Not in viral moments of disrespect, but in the quiet dignity of doing what's right. Our story isn't about one moment of poor judgment. It's about what happens when people choose to learn from their mistakes. James watched the final cut with the group, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said finally, "when I was assigned to evaluate your community service, I expected to see someone just going through the motions. Instead, I'm seeing real change, not just in you, Rick, but in how you're affecting others." The media outlets' response to their counter-proposal came quickly. They were fascinated by this different approach, agreeing to tell the fuller story of transformation rather than focusing on the controversial moment that started it all. The morning the feature story was set to air, the Stonebridge Youth Center buzzed with nervous energy. Teens and mentors gathered around the large screen in the common area, while Rick paced anxiously near the back of the room. James Bennett stood quietly by the door, his presence reassuring as always. "Stop pacing," Emily called out to Rick. "You're making everyone nervous." "I can't help it," Rick admitted. "Last time I was on national news, it was for all the wrong reasons." Jennifer squeezed his hand supportively. "This time is different. This time it's about something real." The news segment began with footage everyone expected, the infamous cup-throwing incident. But instead of sensationalizing it, the story quickly shifted focus. The camera panned across the youth center, showing teens working with local businesses on their social media strategies, content creators mentoring younger kids about online responsibility and the genuine connections being formed. In an age where viral infamy often leads to profitable notoriety, the reporter's voice narrated, this story took an unexpected turn. The man who threw that cup didn't capitalize on his moment of shame. Instead, he turned it into a catalyst for change. The segment cut to interviews with the teens. Emily's blue hair filled the screen as she spoke with characteristic directness. "We thought he was just another jerk trying to get famous. Turns out he was exactly what we needed. Someone who'd hit rock bottom and learned from it." Marcus appeared next, speaking about his own near miss with infamy. "I almost copied his mistake. Now I'm helping kids avoid the traps I almost fell into. That's what real influence should be about." The story continued, showing the center's impact on the community. Local business owners praised the social media assistance they'd received from the teens. Parents spoke about positive changes in their children's online behavior. Even some of James's fellow royal guards commented on the unexpected positive outcome of the incident, but it was the segment's conclusion that caught everyone by surprise. The camera followed James and Rick walking through the palace grounds. stopping at the spot where the incident had occurred. "Looking back," Rick said on screen, "I was desperate for attention, for relevance. I thought shocking people was the only way to stay visible in a world that moves so fast." James responded with quiet authority, "Sometimes the most important lessons come from our worst moments. The question is what we do with those lessons." The camera then showed their current work at the youth center, their unlikely friendship, born from a moment of disrespect, transformed into mutual respect. As the segment ended, the room erupted in cheers. The story had done more than justice to their work. It had captured the authentic heart of what they were building. But celebration was quickly interrupted by their phones buzzing simultaneously. The center's social media accounts were exploding with activity. "Youth centers across the country want to know about our program," Emily reported, scrolling through messages. "Companies are reaching out about sponsorship opportunities," Marcus added. Jennifer pulled up their analytics. "The website's crashing from traffic. Everyone wants to know how to start similar programs in their communities." Rick stood in the midst of the chaos, feeling overwhelmed, but in a completely different way than his viral moment had overwhelmed him. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about something much bigger. Chief Constable Walker chose that moment to visit, carrying a thick folder. "Well," he said, surveying the excited crowd, "it seems your community service has evolved into something quite remarkable." Rick straightened up, suddenly reminded that he was still technically serving a sentence. "Sir, I know this isn't exactly what you prescribed." Walker held up a hand, smiling slightly. "No, it's better, which is why I brought these." He opened the folder, revealing partnership agreements. "The palace wants to officially support your program. Help expand it to other youth centers." James stepped forward, his expression serious. "With proper oversight, of course." "Of course," Walker agreed. "We're thinking Mr. Thompson's experience might be valuable beyond his mandated service period, if he's interested in continuing on a more permanent basis." Rick looked around the room, at the teens who had become like family, at Marcus and the other content creators who had found a new purpose, at Jennifer who had supported his transformation, and at James who had gone from victim of his disrespect to partner in something meaningful. "I think," Rick said slowly, "this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Emily rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Obviously, someone has to keep teaching kids how not to be jerks on the internet. The laughter that followed was interrupted by more notifications. Messages were pouring in from influencers and content creators worldwide, asking how they could help, how they could learn, how they could be part of this movement. 2 days after the news segment aired, the Stonebridge Youth Center faced a new challenge: success. The once quiet building now buzzed with activity as Rick, James, and the team struggled to handle the overwhelming response to their story. "We've got 300 partnership requests," Emily announced, her blue hair tied back as she sorted through emails. "Everyone from tech companies to educational institutions wants to collaborate." She made air quotes around the last word, her skepticism evident. Rick, who had been reviewing proposals since dawn, looked up from his laptop. "The question is, how do we grow without losing what makes this place special?" James Bennett, still in his guard uniform from his morning shift at the palace, took a seat at the conference table. "We start by remembering why we're here. This began as a lesson in responsibility and respect. Let's not lose that in the excitement." Marcus, who had become an integral part of the team, spread out a series of documents. "I've analyzed the offers. Most of them just want to capitalize on our viral moment, but there are a few that seem genuine." Jennifer, who had taken on the role of program coordinator, pointed to one particular proposal: the National Youth Development Foundation wants to implement our social media responsibility curriculum in youth centers across the country. That could work, Rick mused, but only if we maintain direct oversight. No watering down the message, Emily snorted. You mean the message of don't be a jerk like Rick was? The room laughed, including Rick. The ability to joke about his past actions was a sign of how far they'd come, but the serious question remained: how to scale their impact while maintaining their integrity. Chief Constable Walker arrived for their scheduled meeting, bringing with him an unexpected guest, Sarah Miller, the tourist who had photographed Rick's original incident. She now worked for a major digital education initiative. I've been following your progress, Sarah explained, setting up her laptop. What you're building here, it's exactly what the digital education sector needs. Real experiences, real consequences, real solutions. She pulled up a presentation showing how their program could be adapted for different communities while maintaining its core principles. The teens would remain at the heart of everything, with former content creators, like Rick and Marcus, serving as mentors. But here's the crucial part, Sarah emphasized. Each center needs its own identity. We're not creating franchises, we're fostering communities. James nodded approvingly. Like the Royal Guard, same principles, different posts, each serving their unique community. The meeting stretched into hours as they mapped out a sustainable growth plan. Emily and the teens insisted on maintaining direct involvement in any new programs. Marcus suggested a mentor training system to ensure quality control. Rick focused on keeping the content authentic and impact-focused. What about the palace? Connection, Jennifer asked. That's part of what makes our story unique. Walker smiled. Actually, the palace is very interested in expanding their community engagement. They're proposing a formal partnership, using the Guard's discipline and dedication as a model for youth development. Rick couldn't help but appreciate the irony. His disrespect toward a Royal Guard had led to a program that would now partner with the institution he had once mocked. As they worked, more visitors arrived, representatives from other youth centers eager to learn from their experience. The teens took charge, showing them around, explaining their approach to social media responsibility. See this wall? Emily explained to a group, pointing to their impact board covered in success stories. Every post, every video, every campaign has to answer one question. How does this help others? In the corner, a young content creator who had recently joined their program was teaching seniors how to spot online scams. Another group of teens was helping a local animal shelter improve their digital presence. The center had become a hub of positive influence far beyond its original scope. You know what's really cool? Marcus observed, watching the activities. None of this is about going viral anymore. It's about making actual change. Rick stood back, taking in the scene. Just months ago, he had been desperately chasing clicks and views, measuring his worth in likes and shares. Now he was part of something that measured success in lives changed and lessons learned. James approached him quietly. Having second thoughts about your community service ending soon? Actually, Rick replied, I was thinking about what comes next. This isn't just a program anymore, it's a movement, and movements need leaders who understand both sides of the story. Jennifer, overhearing, joined them. You've found your real influence, Rick. Not in shocking moments, but in showing others how to learn from their mistakes. The day wound down with a unique celebration, a live stream connecting their center with youth groups worldwide who wanted to implement similar programs. Emily and the teens shared their experiences candidly, while Rick and Marcus offered insights from their journeys of transformation. 6 months after the national news feature, the Stonebridge Youth Center was preparing for its most ambitious undertaking yet, hosting the first international conference on youth digital responsibility. Representatives from 20 countries would be attending, along with major social media platforms and digital education experts. But on the morning of final preparations, Rick Thompson received a call that would test everything they had built. "You need to see this," Jennifer said, rushing into his office with her tablet. A video was trending across multiple platforms, footage of another Royal Guard incident, but this time at a different palace. The troubling part wasn't just the disrespect shown to the guard, it was the perpetrator's words. "This is for Rick Thompson, the original legend. Your redemption story inspired me. After this goes viral, I'll start my own youth program too." Rick felt his stomach drop. Everything they had worked for, all the progress they had made, was being twisted to justify exactly the kind of behavior they had been fighting against. "It's already got 2 million views," Emily reported, her blue hair now streaked with responsible influencer silver. "And copycats are popping up at tourist spots around the world." James Bennett, who had been promoted to captain but still maintained his connection with the center, arrived in full uniform. "The palace is concerned. They're questioning whether our program is actually preventing bad behavior or inadvertently encouraging it." The conference center was already filling with international delegates. They could hear the excited chatter of youth representatives from around the world, all eager to learn from the Stonebridge model. But now, that model was under threat. "Call everyone in," Rick decided. "All hands meeting now." Within 30 minutes, the center's main hall was packed. The original team, Rick, James, Emily, Marcus, Jennifer, sat at the front, facing their extended family of mentors, teens, and program graduates. On screens around the room, partners from other youth centers joined virtually. "We knew this day would come," Rick began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "Someone was bound to try using our story to justify bad behavior. The question is, how do we respond?" Emily stood up, her expression fierce. "We show them what real inspiration looks like. Not some cheap copy of a mistake, but actual positive change." Marcus, who had become their head of digital strategy, pulled up their impact statistics. "In 6 months, our program has helped launch 15 new youth centers. We've mentored over 1,000 teens in responsible social media use. Local businesses we've helped have seen an average 40% growth in ethical engagement." "But numbers aren't enough," James added. "We need to show them the human story." Jennifer had already been working on something. She pulled up a video compilation she'd been preparing for the conference, testimonials from teens whose lives had been changed. Business owners who had learned to grow sustainably, former troublemakers who had become mentors. "This is good," Rick said, "but we need more. We need to show them what happened after my incident, the hard parts, the real transformation." For the next few hours, the entire team worked together. Teens edited footage, mentors shared their experiences, and partners from around the world contributed their perspectives. They were creating something that would show the true meaning of their movement. As they worked, the viral copycat video continued to spread, but something unexpected was happening in the comments. People who had been through their program were responding, sharing their own stories of change, challenging the notion that disrespect could lead to meaningful influence. Sarah Miller, who had become their program development director, arrived with an update from her digital education contacts. "The algorithms are shifting. Our response videos are getting more engagement than the copycat. Authentic content is winning." By late afternoon, they had their answer ready. Rick stood before the conference attendees, with his team beside him and screens showing partners from around the world. "Today, someone tried to use our story to justify disrespect," he began. "They thought that my moment of shame was the key to success, but they missed the most important part, the hard work of real change. The screens behind him came to life, showing their new video. It started with his cup-throwing incident, but quickly transformed into a raw, honest look at the aftermath. The tough conversations, the resistance from teens who didn't trust him, the moments of doubt and growth. It showed James Bennett not as a prop in a viral video, but as a mentor who chose to give someone a chance at redemption. It featured Emily and the other teens teaching influential adults about authenticity. It highlighted Marcus and others who had nearly followed the wrong path, but found a better way. Real influence, Rick continued, isn't built on viral moments. It's built on consistent, genuine effort to make things better. Yes, my mistake led me here. But it's what happened after. The hard work, the real connections, the daily choice to do better. That's what matters. The international audience sat captivated as the video showed the ripple effects of their work. Youth centers around the world adapting their model, teens becoming digital responsibility advocates, communities being transformed. To anyone thinking of copying my mistake, Rick concluded, I invite you to copy what came after instead. Join us in doing the real work. It's harder than throwing a cup or disrespecting others for views, but it's work that actually matters. 1 year to the day after Rick Thompson threw a cup at Royal Guard James Bennett, a very different scene unfolded at Stonebridge Palace. The morning sun once again bathed the historic walls in golden light. But this time, the crowd gathered for a different purpose. The palace had chosen this symbolic anniversary to launch its new Global Youth Digital Responsibility Initiative, and the location couldn't have been more perfect. The exact spot where a moment of disrespect had transformed into a worldwide movement for positive change. Rick stood at the podium looking vastly different from the desperate influencer he'd been a year ago. Behind him sat James, now Captain Bennett, along with Emily, Marcus, Jennifer, and representatives from youth centers across the globe. A year ago, Rick began, his voice carrying across the courtyard, I stood right here and made the worst decision of my life. I thought viral infamy was a path to relevance. I was wrong. The crowd included many familiar faces. Sarah Miller with her camera, documenting this moment just as she had captured the original incident. Chief Constable Walker stood proudly with his officers. Even some of the tourists who had witnessed the original event had returned for this full-circle moment. But being wrong, Rick continued, taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Real influence isn't about moments of shock or disrespect. It's about the consistent choice to make things better. Emily stepped up next, her trademark directness, now tempered with earned wisdom. We've worked with over 10,000 young people this year, she announced, not teaching them how to go viral, but showing them how to use their voices responsibly. The screens behind them displayed statistics that told a powerful story. Incidents of tourist disrespect at historical sites down by 60%. Youth-led digital responsibility programs established in 47 countries. Over 1 million young people trained in ethical social media use. Marcus shared his perspective next. A year ago, I almost copied Rick's mistake. Now I help others avoid that path. We're building something real, something that lasts longer than any viral video. Captain Bennett's speech drew particular attention. Sometimes, he said, standing tall in his ceremonial uniform, the most powerful guard we can maintain isn't around a palace. It's around our principles, our integrity, our commitment to doing what's right. The ceremony included a special surprise, video messages from youth centers worldwide, each sharing their own stories of transformation. Teams in Tokyo, Sydney, New York, and London all reported similar successes, each adapting the Stonebridge model to their local needs while maintaining its core values. Jennifer, who had supported Rick's journey from the beginning, unveiled their newest initiative, a global mentorship platform connecting reformed content creators with young people struggling to find their authentic voice online. But the most powerful moment came when Rick called forward an unexpected guest, the young man who had tried to copy his infamous moment just 6 months ago. "My name is David," the young man said, his voice shaky but determined. "I thought copying Rick's mistake would give me his success. Instead, I learned that real success comes from admitting our mistakes and working to make things right." David was now running a successful youth program in his own community, turning his own moment of shame into an opportunity for genuine change. As the ceremony concluded, Rick looked out at the crowd one last time. "A year ago, I threw a cup at a royal guard for views. Today, we've built something far more valuable. A movement that turns moments of disrespect into opportunities for growth." The royal guards, standing at attention, including some who had witnessed the original incident, maintained their perfect composure. But there was pride in their bearing, knowing they had been part of a story that transformed lives. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Rick found himself back at the exact spot where everything had changed. James joined him, both men looking at the place where a cup had once arced through the air. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Rick asked. James smiled slightly. "Actually, yes. The moment you chose to do the real work instead of just serving your time, that's when I knew this could be something special." Emily, overhearing, couldn't resist adding her perspective. "Yeah, who knew being a complete jerk could lead to something actually good? As long as you stop being a jerk, obviously." The team laughed together, their bond forged through months of challenges and triumphs. They had built something remarkable, not just a program or an initiative, but a new way of thinking about influence and responsibility. As the sun set on Stonebridge Palace, casting long shadows across the historic grounds, Rick looked at his phone one last time. His latest post wasn't about viral moments or shocking content. It was a simple message about the power of transformation, accompanied by a photo of his team. Guards, teens, mentors, all united in a mission to make the digital world a little bit better. The likes and shares weren't in the millions, but every engagement represented a real connection, a potential for positive change, a step toward more responsible influence. And that, Rick had learned, was worth more than any viral moment could ever be. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this journey of transformation touched your heart, you won't want to miss these incredible tales of redemption and change. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the notification bell to never miss our daily dose of amazing true stories. Leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts on this incredible journey of transformation. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more incredible stories that will leave you speechless.